Okay, perfect. So we'll start. I would like to welcome all of you to our first Substance webinar. We're all glad to see you here today. My name is Christina and I will be your host for today's webinar. Creative tools, as one of the resellers of both Adobe, Autodesk and Maxon, among others, within the EMEA region. We like all the cool stuff within the games and VFX industry. So I'm glad to have Laurens here today to show a part of what we're selling today. We're glad to inform you that this webinar is a collaboration between Creative Tools and Adobe. And we're honored to have Laurens Corijn with us here today. He's the lead technical artist of the Substance by Adobe team. So before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. Please feel free to use the Q&A box for any questions during the webinar. We'll try to bring them up during the presentation. If you have any particular questions, or if you want to know any specific things about licensing, for example, so my colleagues will be able to answer you in the chat during this session. With all of this said, I'll hand over to Laurens. So warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Christina. So hi, everybody. I'm going to be showing you some hands-on stuff, and let's just dive right into it. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see, share, that should work, I think. Well, let me try and bring the Zoom interface because I can't really. Yeah, there we go. That still makes it visible. All right, I have a little PowerPoint that's more like a crutch for me. So my name is Laurens Corijn. I'm a lead technical artist, and the agenda for today, I'm not going to use the presenter view, by the way, that makes the screen go all obscured. First, I'm going to show you some new features for Substance 3D Sampler. This is our application focused on processing scans, and it's a little bit easier to use than Designer and Modeler. It's not always used all that much in entertainment, so I thought it would be interesting to show. A few weeks ago, released a bunch of new nodes for Substance 3D Designer. I'm going to show you a few of those. I won't dive too deep into it because they can get pretty technical. Then actually, I forgot to put something in here. So there will actually be Painter upcoming features. I was still checking with the team if I was allowed to show it. So after Designer, I'll show upcoming features for Painter. So sneak peek at what's coming. And then after that, I want to do a quick demo of Substance 3D Modeler. So that's our new modeling application. And I'll try and show you a quick way how to use it. And then at the end, I have something fun I was working on using the full pipeline. So Modeler, Painter, Stager, a little bit of Designer and so forth. I'll show you the whole pipeline, a little project I made to show what's possible these days. It's still early with Modeler especially, but it's quite cool to see what's possible. And then after that, I'll leave some extra time for questions as well. And just for the questions, so after each app, I'll try to pause if people have specific questions, because it might not make sense to answer a question about Sampler all the way at the end 40 minutes later. It's just easier to do it right after I've shown it. Right, so for Sampler, what's new in Sampler? A few things, I'll go over these. So we've got lighting environment tools, content-aware fill, clone stamp improvements, there's a brush bar, and image to material AI has a preserved tiling option. So let's just go straight to Substance 3D Sampler. And Sampler lets you do two things. If you don't know the application, you can make materials. So show that more in a moment, but you can also build environment lights. And these are HDRIs, like you know them for rendering. So I'll make a new environment light. And I've got some files that I will build this off. So in this IBL here, these are some bracketed photos that I took myself on a trip even. So this is with a 360 camera, so multiple exposures. And Sampler lets you put these together into an actual high dynamic range image file, like an EXR or an HDR file. So I take these multiple exposures, I drop them in, and Sampler asks me what to do with them. So I want to do an HDR merge. If I click OK, and I let it calculate for a little bit, it does the import and it merges all the brackets into an actual HDR file. So there you see, and now this sphere in the middle is lit with the HDR. The shadows are progressive, so they improve once I stop rotating the view. But you see it's still kind of low on intensity. I have to make a few improvements to this. And also before, it was kind of hard to see the HDR. So you can go to 2D view and you see this. But what we've added, and this is a big improvement to the workflow, at the bottom, there's a projection mode now where you can actually navigate and look at the HDR as if you used to be able to do in, I think you can still do that in Photoshop. You can navigate around as if it's a 360 photograph. So I can use this to improve things a bit. So one thing I like to do, for example, if I look up at the sun, even though it's a cloudy day, it's still not exactly bright enough. So my way to fix that in here would be to add a sphere light. And the sphere light is going to appear over here. And I want to put that on the sun to make it a bit stronger. And one of the things that used to be annoying is you couldn't lower the exposure just for a preview. That's another option we've added. There's an exposure preview where you can just drop down the exposure a lot, which makes it way easier for me to find the position of the sun. And then I can start playing around with this and increasing the exposure. So I don't know, I think it has to be something around 13, probably a bit lower, 12. It's tied to the intensity of the sun as well. So I have to find the right spot. There we go. So get the sun in like so. And I can always set the exposure back if I want to see it at a normal intensity. Now, another thing that we've added, so I've talked about these HDR authoring tools, but straight away I can jump into that. I might want to erase a few things. You can actually, if you look closely, you can see me sitting here taking the picture. And this is fairly low res. So let me switch it to 4K. There we go. That's high res. And you can also see my car in the background, which is not the most interesting thing in this photo. You could erase these things out by clone stamping it, but clone stamp actually doesn't even work inside the HDR. So you can use content aware fill. And you might know this from Photoshop. It's like an AI patching option. So I can actually paint over a spot and it'll automatically try to find a patch nearby to sort of place that in there. It's like an automatic clone stamp where I don't have to bother with the exact details. So again, if I want to get rid of my car, I just paint over it and it automatically fills it in. I don't even have to bother with finding the exact position to put in there. So if I want to get rid of the house and so forth, all that's possible and it's fairly easy to do. And while I'm doing that, you can also see the new brush bar at the top here. So before that used to be set up in here, but right now it's become a little bit easier to switch between paint and erase. So if I want to get rid of anything again, I can click on the eraser and I can say, you know what, I didn't actually want to erase that house. I can change the size and we've added a few new options. So I can use Control plus scroll to increase the size of this. So all of that together makes it much easier to paint in the 2D viewport of Substance 3D Sampler. Now, I can show you a bit more of that content aware fill. Let me see, jump out, and I'll go into content aware. Yeah, an interesting one was these brick concrete pillars here. So you've seen me do it for really small things. I'm going to set this down a little bit smaller in size because content aware is not super fast. And I want to get rid of these concrete pillars on the side here. So again, you could do that by clone stamping it out. But if I go for the content aware fill, just to show you what's possible with that, increase this in size quite a lot. I could paint over these edges. I could paint over here. If I then have patience a little bit, you see it fills it in with the bricks and even tries to keep the pattern in a pretty good fashion. You might have to clone stamp over a few of these areas yourself, but you see it's pretty fast to do. Of course, if you go to 2K or 4K, it takes quite a lot longer to do. Clone stamp itself is faster, but it's just an easier, low effort way to do this kind of stuff. All right, let's see what else we had. Talked about content aware fill, the clone stamp, the brush bar, and final one. One of the highlights of Sampler, of course, is if I do a image to material. For example, I found this photo online and I want to turn that into a material. I can always drop that in. Sampler is going to ask me what to do. So image to material, I'll click OK. It starts calculating. And once this is done calculating, it's going to turn that into a full material for me. And one of the issues that we used to have, and let me change this a little bit, change the settings of the viewer, set the tiling bit higher. So before, we didn't have an option to preserve the tiling very well in here. So the image to material would sometimes have seams. And right now we've added a new option. I think this image is actually pretty good for it. You can turn on preserve tiling, and especially in height, for example, it's going to do a better job at keeping the tiling. So if you've pre-tiled your image before, you actually found an image that is tiling already, you can see it makes a change at the edges. You can set it to do that for you now, because before it might lead to issues or small artifacts where the edges wouldn't tile. What I'm talking about specifically here, see that glow from the edges? You can now set it to respect that. And what that actually also means is before, if you wanted to set up the tiling on a material, you had to do it after it's converted to a material. So it would fix the tiling on base color, normal, roughness, height, and so forth. But now you could actually do it before on the scan, and it's much faster to calculate because it doesn't have to fix tiling for 6 or 5 channels at once. You could just do it on the single image inside sampler. So pretty easy to set that up. I think that's about it. Maybe one more thing to point out, if you've used Sampler before, if I switch to the light, this is one that I personally requested because it bothered me a lot, is you can now have 2 different viewer settings. So if you're working on a light and on a material, it's going to have a different model in the viewport. It's going to have different lighting, different tiling setups, and you can switch between the 2 because the way you would preview when authoring a light versus a material is actually quite different. So you've seen it switch to not having a material in here either. Makes it all the much easier to work with. That's kind of what I wanted to show for Sampler. Time's ticking, so I want to move on. Do we have any specific questions regarding Sampler? Anything that people are wondering about or that wasn't clear? I'll take them now if there are any. I can't really see it, so I'll let Christina or Hannah take those.
So far, there are no questions. So
all right.
I'll stop you once I get anything.
Yes, cool. I'll pause after each app as well to take these.
Okay, perfect.
So let me close that, and I'm not going to save that. And we're going to jump into Designer now. And I'll go to my PowerPoint. I put some images in here of these because I had easy GIFs, but usually it's easier to show you live. So we've got a whole bunch of new nodes. Tile random, triangle grids, non-uniform rotation, grunges from Painter, new noises, easing functions. There's actually too much to show. I'm just going to pick a few, cherry pick a few to show you. So if I go to Designer, and I'm going to open one of these packages that I had, show you what's possible with these nodes. Just wait for that to open. So last release for Designer was mainly a content release where we added a lot of new nodes, which hasn't happened for actually quite a while. And a lot of them were noises as well, because we really like working with those, and Designer is all about that. So this one here, this material, let me drop it in the 3D view, and I'll put this at the bottom there, make it a bit easier to see. All right, and I'll set up the height as well, just so we have a little bit of displacement going on. All right, so this material is based around the new tile random that we have. If you remember before, the old tile random that we had, so that's the first one. This one wasn't all that interesting. You see, it just cuts certain tiles into 2, but this new one is really, really, really nice. You can actually set up a whole bunch of things here. So I can change how much they randomize, and you can slide between different settings. You can add things like a random slant to them, and you can see the pattern all updates dynamically because the whole material is driven by it. But what I think is extra cool about this tile random is that it outputs flood fill data. So if you remember what flood fill does, flood fill lets you analyze cells and then do a different property for each cell. So you can have a different color for each cell, a different angle for each cell. And that flood fill data, so if I search for flood fill, you can do colors, gradients, lots of different things there. So if I say, for example, flood fill to gradient, and I plug this in, next to having these random tiles, I can also have random angles for each of these. It gives you a whole lot of possibilities to do lots of these random tiles. Another one that I did as soon as I saw this node, I don't have the example here, but I built a random procedural city grid. You know, like if you look at this without the random angles, you could get like a Manhattan city street grid in here. Very easy to do with that. Also because it takes, like a sampler, it takes input maps. So for the size, the slant, the masking, the distance, you can all input extra maps to drive it. So you could input a for example, a fading mask in the center to have only cells in the middle and so forth. So pretty interesting. Let's jump on to another one. Drop this in. So this one uses some of the new 3D noises that we've done, or the new Voronoi noise. So Voronoi does these kind of cell noises. So this was made by my coworker, and Steve. She's combined a bunch of these to create these sci-fi greeble tiles. Usually, as you remember, lots of the noises are very organic and grungy looking, but so we've added a really nice one with this Voronoi one that lets you change, that lets you generate these, basically these sort of geometric shapes that allow for a whole bunch of different sci-fi greeble type of things. And let me open up another one, the sea that we have here. This one's really nice and complex. She's done a nice painterly ocean effect here. And this one uses some of the new 3D noise as well. So the Voronoi that we have, same one, but it uses a different distance metric. So if you set the distance mode, Manhattan was the last one for the cells. The Euclidean, you get rounder ones, and she's combined a whole bunch of different ones to get this sort of ocean effect. Before, that was pretty hard to do because you didn't have that right kind of shape of noise in here. You'd have to use the clouds, but it was much harder to pull off. So let's see, which other ones have we gone over yet? Triangle grid. Let me just quickly do a new graph, and I can show you that. So triangle grid does a really interesting sort of polygon triangle height map type of thing. So it's like it's drawing triangles on a height map, and it's creating a polygon grid out of those. And you can actually set the color output mode to different modes, and gives you a whole bunch of options. This one here, for example, let me see if I can change the thickness. This one, for example, allows you to do, if you think of your hands and you look at the shapes that are around your knuckles, for example, you get these sort of like random sized triangles. So outside of geometric shapes, you can go pretty far with this. My coworker managed to do, I don't have the file here, a leather with this sort of triangular skin leather pattern with just stacking a few of these. It gives you a bunch of options, and you can also plug in your own height map. So if I plug in, for example, a Perlin noise into this, then, and I set it to use the node, the noise, the height, it's actually going to use that map to create the triangle grid out of that. So lots of possibilities with this one. Another one that I actually made this one myself for the grunges. Remember that if you were working in Painter, let me just really quickly jump to Painter, and I go to the textures and I search for grunge. Painter has a bunch of grunges that Designer doesn't have.
Laurens, I'll just stop you there with a question for.
Go ahead.
Is it possible to loop the ocean for, say, 60 frames?
Yes, that's possible. So if you want to do this kind of stuff, it is possible. It's kind of tricky to set up, though. You need to know a little bit about functions, and you'll have to make use of our slightly hidden these days program Substance player. But yes, you can loop it and create that kind of thing. So if you want me to jump back, it's not set up for it. So you'd have to hook up a few things, but you'd basically use the disorder. So if I change the disorder, see how the ocean is moving, you'd have to move a few of the noises, but you can just loop this and create 60 frames out of it where you're driving it by time. So yes, that's possible. I'm not sure if we have videos on this, but it's something that I think is documented in the documentation. If not, you can send me a mail and I can explain it more later. It's fairly technical. All right, let's jump back to the grunges I was talking about. So like I said, Painter has a bunch of grunges that Designer doesn't have. I took the procedural ones out of that and converted those to Designer. So those are things like scratches, shavings, spots, that kind of thing. So this means now that if you've built something in Painter, I usually built a smart material in here and I wanted to replicate that in Designer. It's a bit easier now because they come with the application nowadays. What else do I have? New 2D and 3D noises. So these 3D noises, I think we had 3 before, but so the Voronoi and I think the Voronoi fractal and the ridge noise, these are new ones that we've added as well. So these 3D noises mean that you can do actual shape noises that intersect with the 3D shape if you use a position map. So just to show you real quick what that does, if I drop in one of these and I do a 3D Cube G buffer. So this is our position map. If I plug that in, you can see that the noise intersects in 3D space with this one here. So you're not actually getting any seams over the edges because the noise is intersecting. If you bake a position map from a mesh, you could plug that into this noise as well, and then use that for really complex, completely seamless noises that are applied to a mesh. And they don't even have those triplanar edge artifacts because they're actual 3D noises. These have been added to Painter as well, by the way. And then finally, a last fairly technical one. Let me just open that one. This is one that I made. Sometimes I wanted to have a different way to interpolate my my functions. So I've made a really simple graph here where if I have a parameter, I've set an easing function to this. So I'm just moving this in a linear fashion, but we've added functions and you can find them under functions easings that remap a linear function into an ease in or an ease out, an ease in, adjust and ease out, and so forth. So if you want to see what that function looks like, it's fairly simple. I take the input, which is linear. I multiply it by 2. I do a triangle wave, which basically turns it from, instead of a left to right slope, it does it into a bounced slope. So if I set this as the output, you can see that's what the triangle wave is. And the ease in and out does that with it. So if I would apply a different one to it, say I only want an ease out circular, I could grab that one, set it as the output node, and you see how it behaves differently. So this lets you, I'm using it for a gradient. So I'm taking a linear gradient, remapping it to circular, but it also lets you change the behavior of an actual parameter. So what you're seeing me do here, moving this input, is essentially just using that same function to remap a graph. So if you want to dive into the math, this gives you a lot more options to fine tune your gradients and your parameter behavior. That's it for designer. I think I'm doing okay in terms of schedule because I've got a lot more to show after this. Any other specific questions about this? Things people are wondering that wasn't clear, or?
It looks like you're very specific and clear, so
I'm very
so
specific.
far.
Okay, I like hearing that. Let me close that, and I'm not going to save it. No, I don't want to save any of those. All right, so Painter. Let me jump to the next slide to show you. So we've talked a bit about this, but if you don't know, you're still getting a sneak peek at upcoming version 8.1, where the main features are new 3D noises, same ones as we had in Designer. New grunges, so we've added a few new, they're not procedural, they're like bitmap based. There's a new physical size mode. Not sure how important this is for entertainment customers, but I'll still show it because it's pretty cool what it does actually. And there's a few new bakers in here as well. And the release is, I'm not going to be too specific because you never know, it changes by a day or so, but it's in the coming weeks. Like it's not even 2 weeks away, so that should be here fairly soon. So let me open up a sample file. Let's take the preview sphere. All right, so those 3D noises that we had, again, I can show you what those do. Let's do a fill here. It's the same ones. If I take, for example, this 3D noise and drop it in the base color, and it's still generating. Looks like, oh, it's slowing down a lot. Yeah, there we go. There we've got it. So this is running completely across the seams. Let me actually change the scale a little bit to make it a bit smaller so that you can see it. And we'll switch to base color mode. There we go. So this is completely seamless. So you don't even have to worry about seams at all. If I would use the triplanar mode, on the contrary, especially on a sphere, you would start getting issues on sort of where the planes are intersecting and the angle is sort of dropping away. Well, the 3D noises are totally perfect for that. And just to be clear.
So it looks like we lost Laurens there for a minute.
Yeah. All right, so I'm back.
Perfect.
Okay, let me try and pick up where we left off. Let me see in my presentation as well. Where was I with Painter? Yeah, so I talked about the new grunges, and there's the physical size mode and the bakers. All right, let's jump back. So for the grunges, it's kind of hard to tell which ones they are exactly, but there's a bunch of new ones. Like I'm pretty sure the cobweb, charcoal, bush, those are new ones that we've generated, that we've created. So just a more extensive collection of grunges that are in here. I can talk a bit about the bakers as well. So the new bakers that we've added are height. So you actually bake height displacement from a high definition mesh, nothing too complicated to it. Bent normals. So bent normals is a complicated normal map that puts the ambient occlusion into the normals so that when your model is shaded, it gets basically free specular occlusion and ambient occlusion along with the normal map. So you can now bake that inside, you will be able to bake that inside Substance Painter very soon. And our shader also supports showing it. And then finally, there's an opacity baker. That's a really simple one. This allows you to bake, for example, you say you have a wire mesh or a chainmail, and before you would get mist rays, now you can just bake opacity from that. So you could have the parts of the high poly mesh that are missing would just become opacity eventually. So 3 new bakers that have been added. I don't have really anything to show this specifically, but they're pretty straightforward in terms of what they do. And then
We
finally,
have another question here
go ahead.
regarding the mapping. What is the best way to create normal map in Designer from black and white image, like a logo, and have a clean map?
In Designer, that depends on what you want to achieve exactly, but the normal node would basically do exactly that for you. I can show that really quick. So let's do a quick empty map. Let's do a shape. So say this is like your really simple logo. Just make a small round one. I mean, I might show really basic stuff, but essentially you'd plug it into a normal node, it would convert it for you. But the issue is usually it gets very thin. So my trick would be to add, for example, a blur between that. So if I do a high quality blur and you increase the intensity of this conversion, let's just pump it to 10. You have a lot more control over what it does exactly. See, so if you have a logo that's too sharp, you might have to blur it a bit in Designer to get a little bit of this offset. Another option would be to use the bevel node as well. And the bevel node does a normal map for you on the side as well. So if you do the bevel, it gives you this perfectly beveled normal map. This one's a bit harder to achieve otherwise. So that's another option as well. Keep in mind, depending on the input, you get this pixel stepping. So the fix for that would be to do a blur with a super tiny value, and that one kind of gets rid of most of the banding on your image. So I hope that kind of answers the question. So in Designer, you'd basically use the normal node, but you have to make sure to massage your height map with blurs and bevels to get sort of the right shape out of it. All right.
A lot of questions coming in now.
A lot of questions coming in now.
So
okay.
I'll keep going here, and you
sure.
just me a few. It's not currently possible to bake position from a high poly in Painter, right?
Position from a high poly, let me see. I think it doesn't do it from a high poly, because if you do that, to be honest, you might want that, but it might cause issues where it's going to start looking weird on your mesh because it's really tied to the mesh. But no, it's not possible right now. I can ask if they're planning to do it, but I think there might be some technical concerns there. That's the question, if it's possible or not, or if it's coming, or because I might be running
both, if it's possible or if it's planned to be coming in the future.
I'll have to check, but I think right now it's not possible, and there's a few technical reasons why you might not want to do it. But it's a good one. Okay. Actually. Let me write that one down, because I need to be taking notes from this to pass it on to the team.
That's great.
Grab my pen here. Please go ahead for the next one.
Say from the same person, is it possible in Designer and the Designer gives us the results that we want?
If it's possible in Designer, okay, hold on. Let me see if I can actually set that up, because it's not super fast to do it in Designer. I'm actually not sure, but so usually in general, to give you context, Designer has much more extensive bakers, but we've decided to simplify it a bit in Painter. So hold on, just drag a quick mesh in here. I think, all right, and then bake model information. And add. Yeah, so Designer does let you do it with a position map from mesh, but in Painter it's obscured because we've decided not to do it yet. So I'd say for now, if you want to do this, you'd have to go through Designer. I'll bring it up with the team to check why they've omitted this. It might be there might be an option that they could add eventually. Can't make any promises, but I'll definitely look into it because I can see why you're wondering about this.
Great.
Any others?
Looks like we're okay at the moment.
All right. I'm gonna jump to the modeler part then actually now, because I've shown most of the stuff. Or actually, no, there's one more thing I want to show. I want to show the physical size in Painter. So if I open up my chair here, so there's a little thing that you can do in Sampler now. Let me show that. So I have a little video here in Sampler. You can set up and you can create a material that matches the real world scale very closely. So you can actually get it to 100% match. Let me play that again. So you set it to, takes a bit more setup. You have to take a photograph with a ruler in there, do the measuring. I'm not going to show the whole workflow because that's been out for a while, but you can ensure that your materials have extra metadata attached to it that tell it what the scale is. So if I even open one of these materials in Designer, for example, this one here, and you look closely, there's a physical size output, which tells it that this was 13.8 by 9.6 centimeters. And it's at a depth of, what is this, like half a millimeter. And this size can now be read by Painter as well. So if I take that same material, so I've actually got two here. If I take those two, bring them in, and I need to tell Painter that this is a base material, which I want to keep for the session. I'll import them. Got those two materials.
Is it possible then to save out the material in Painter?
Saving, so Painters, yeah, you could save them as a smart material, but creating these physical size materials, you can do it in Designer, but it's a lot more manual setup. If you do it inside Sampler, we have a really good video on that, which I made, and it's also like 2-3 months old already, so I'm not going to jump into it anymore. It's easiest to do it in Sampler. But just to show you what it does exactly, if I drop on this on here, you get the problem that like, okay, this scale is totally off. Like, how do I match the real world? The new option, you can set it to triplanar projection. Then the scale, you can set to tiling, which uses UVs, or physical size, which then uses the exact physical size to find it. Now, this is kind of blurry, obviously. That's because if I set it to 4K, there you go, it gets really sharp and I get that exact correct scale. I've got, this material is really, really fine. So I've got another one, which comes from our assets website. If I drop that one on again, same problem, like what's the actual scale on this thing? Set it to triplanar, set it to physical size, and it uses what we intended as the physical size combined with the scale of this mesh. That does mean that this chair is scaled as large as it would be in real life. So I don't know how high this is, like a meter high or something. If you come in with something with incorrect scaling, then the physical size is going to be completely off as well. This is more important for people making actual real world stuff. I imagine there's a lot of entertainment customers who might not care so much about this, but still it's handy in some cases where you don't want to mess with the tiling or sort of guess it by estimating it. So there's that. That's coming in Painter as well. Real quick, any more questions about this before I jump into Modeler?
As it looks now, yes, we actually received one just now.
Okay.
Can searching for grayscale in Designer please bring up a grayscale notes for those
Sorry,
of us?
I didn't really catch that completely. What was the question?
Can searching for grayscale in Designer please bring up the grayscale nodes for those of us from Commonwealth?
Ah, you mean gray with an E?
Yes. Sorry, yes.
Yeah,
grayscale.
okay. That's actually a really good one. Usually, though, to be honest, like I'm not saying it's invalid, but you do know that the menu right now, it's actually filtering based on what you do. So if I have, for example, another levels, this is grayscale. If you search for, let's say I want to do a tile generator on this, it filters them automatically. So it only shows you the grayscale ones if your selected node has a grayscale option, while if you've got a color output and you search for tile, it only shows you the color ones. So usually you don't have to search for it specifically. It's actually a good point. I think what we could do is we could probably add a tag to the nodes that contains gray with an E, so that you don't have to bother with that. Let me actually write that one down. It's the first time I've been asked for this, but gray nodes. All right, any other questions? Nothing specific? No? All right. I might
Go
jump
for it.
to
Yeah,
yeah, we're
nothing
good.
yet. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, I'm going to jump to Modeler then, and I'm not going to save any of this. Okay, I hope this goes well because Modeler is in beta. So I have to be very clear about that. It's in beta. So that means there can be issues. It can be unstable. And also it's very heavy. This program is one of the few that really makes my computer scream and work very hard. That's also very cool because what it does is really interesting. So on my slide, just to show you the points that I had. So I said
So I'll
public
just
beta.
slip in a
It's
question in between here then.
yeah. Go ahead.
We get questions all the time now. How do you define the physical size in the Substance Designer as in the
You create
example?
a value output and you hook up a value processor that defines the size in centimeters. So you need to create an output, create a value processor, set the value processor to define the. I've actually closed Designer, so I can't show it anymore. But it's just that. So if you're wondering about it, look into working with value processor in Designer because that's essentially how you do it. Though I'd still add it's usually easier to do in Sampler for now. We don't properly support physical size in Designer, so the viewport and the 3D view can't show it. So it's kind of, like you can do it, but you can't preview it very well in there. We're going to add that in the future, and then I've already made some of those nodes. We'll add nodes to make it much easier to define it. But for now, like with always, you can find hacks, workarounds, tricks to do it in Designer to create them anyway.
Okay. We also have a question. Is it possible to use the physical size on UV projects or only
Not yet.
live
No,
platform?
we have to find out a way to fix this because as you can imagine, the mesh is at a set scale, but your UVs, each shell could be at a different scale, which means it's never going to be correct. And we can't fix the UVs for you. So we have to figure out a way to sort of approximate it. It's really not that straightforward in UV if you think about it. But we definitely want to find a way to add in the future. But for now, first version, no, only triplanar.
Great.
Anything
So that's
else?
all for now.
All right. Back to Modeler. So like I said, it's our volume clay sculpting and modeling application, which means that you don't have to bother with vertices and polygons and triangles and that kind of thing. It works in both desktop and VR. I'm going to use mostly desktop. As you can imagine, putting on the headset and everything, I've never done it much before. And with Oculus, sometimes it acts weird. So I'll try to do it, but only at the end. But again, you don't need a VR headset. You can just use it with a mouse and a monitor. And I'm going to show that more in a moment. It does automatic remesh and UV on export, which is really interesting. It allows for a pretty fast workflow. So I'm going to make a quick thing here. In terms of time, I can go a bit later with we've said an hour, but I can go a little bit later. I think we're running a bit over due to my crash. So what I'm going to do is make a wheel, like a truck wheel. I made one of these before, so I practiced it a bit. So I'm setting up my brush here, and this one isn't placed yet. This is like my cursor. So I'm making sort of an approximate shape of the wheel. Each of these shapes are SDFs, so mathematical shape representations. If I press spacebar, it applies it. It's actually made it. So this one's my cursor. That's what's been placed. And I can then start cutting into this. So because it's a rim, I want to subtract this part. So I can switch to eraser, which goes red. If I then press spacebar, it cuts away the shape and it removes it. And so I'm going to, again, start adding some more. So I'll make the inside of the rim, make that a bit bigger, turn off the bevel, and I'll go back to the regular additive mode. Again, it's all added like that. And you can just start cutting and adding things in here. So if I add some more bevel, subtract again, and again, I'll make this a bit bigger like so. And they have a lot of options, these shapes. So I can add a taper, for example. And let me adjust that a bit. The gizmo is pretty smart as well. We try to keep it simple. So if I hold down Control, I can do angle snapped rotations, and I can push this down again.
So Laurens, is Modeler planned for Mac?
So right now it doesn't work on Mac. Technically, it's quite a challenge, but yes, it's planned. That said, It might not be this year that they do that, but they're definitely looking into it, and eventually we want to get it to run. I will say one thing, you're probably going to need a very, very expensive Mac to run this, because I'm running a 3070 with an i7 and 64 gigabytes of RAM, and it's still running into limits now and then. So I don't imagine you'll be able to do anything meaningful on any kind of portable Mac. You'll probably need a Mac Pro in some way. So just to temper expectations here, and to make sure you can save up for those Macs by the time it's available on Mac. All right, let me just continue this a bit. I want to show you a few things of what's possible here. So I'm going to cut out the middle of this rim. So I've made one single object here, a little piece of a rim, and you can actually create layers in Modeler. So if I click New Layer, I can start a separate object. So I'm going to use the sphere in this case. I want to do one of those simple, like stamped steel truck rims. So I'm going to use this middle part here. I'll add that. I'll switch to subtract again, and I'm going to cut out the back of that like so. All right, now it's going to start to get interesting. I want to cut out little parts over here. So I'm going to add specifically a new object at the top here. So I'm going to create a new layer again for that. I want to do Boolean operations with that. So if I place this one up here, start setting up the shape like so, I'll rotate it. I'll make it a bit wider. I'll give it some more taper, some more bevel. Now I want to start repeating this. So if I turn on symmetry, and you see it starts to repeat around the rim. If I move this around, it's nicely placing it like that. I'll make it a bit bigger, so it definitely intersects. And I'll add the shape like that. Now I want to bend this a bit. See, the problem is that this isn't really following the top. So we have another tool for that, the warp tool. And if I set this into free gizmo movement, the warp tool is essentially like a little soft nudging brush. So if I scale it up, move it up here, and you see it's still doing that radial symmetry, I can sort of push this up and start deforming this a little bit. I have to make it a bit bigger to follow. Warp brush isn't very precise, but it's good for distorting things a bit. There we go. I've distorted that. And just to make clear as well, so these are separate objects in Modeler, and you basically jump in by just double clicking them, and you double click on an empty area to go out. You can use the hotkey S to do that. There's no any sort of layer management or anything. You're just supposed to click and jump in and out of them. In VR, that works pretty well as well. So I'll select these guys. I'll go into Booleans. I'll say make them a subtractor. And I'll click apply. And then it does a subtract of these meshes down here at the bottom. So it's cut them out as you've just seen. And I can use a little bit more warp brush to make this interesting. So let's, for example, push this one up. I'll increase the hardness. And again, push this down and so forth. So you can see I can go pretty far with what's possible here. In the interest of time, I'm going to open up a scene that I already did before. So
in between here, I can just slip in a
go
question then. In any of the Substance packages, are there any ways of rendering and exporting out of turntable? Sorry.
A turntable. So animation and turntable is not possible yet, but this is definitely on the radar for Stager.
Okay.
So Stager is our rendering application. I'll show you that a bit in a moment. And one of the first things we want to add, so no promises. I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to say this too much, but yeah, we do want to add animation there, and turntable is definitely on the top of the list. But right now it's not possible, and you'd have to use something else.
Do you have any information on what kind of plugins or scripts that you that could take care of this, preferably?
That take care of this. So honestly, I would say you'd have to go to Blender, 3ds Max, Maya, Cinema 4D right now to do that kind of thing. It's just the easiest way. They're basically intended for that, and right now we don't support it. So sorry, it's hard to stay inside Substance if you want animation.
No worries.
So yeah, here's my wheel that I finished. One of the cool things, this actually took me, if you know what you're doing, it takes like 10 minutes or something. I made all these separate parts by, again, radially duplicating them. But then once you merge them, you get that sort of nice bevel on the edges for free along with it, because if you could just combine volumes. You do see, if you zoom in, I've used slightly low resolution. The edges start to lose a bit of definition. resolution is something that you do have to manage inside Modeler. So it's a new sort of workflow to get used to. And basically determines the density of the point grid that is used here. So that's basically the wheel that I made. And what's really cool then is that if you go to export and you choose in output UV map triangles, you can choose a target count for this wheel. I don't know, I picked something around 120, 150. You can optimize it for hard surface or organic. Basically, the difference is hard surface is, it's like ZBrush Decimation Master. It uses triangles, and organic is a quad remesher that uses nice organic, suited for deformation quad loops. I've used hard surface for this, and I got a mesh out of that. I'm not doing it now because it does take a while. It takes like 5 minutes to export or something, but the mesh that I got out of it is essentially this one here. And if I'm not mistaken, yeah, there you go. You can see the wireframe here. So this is the hard surface one. It actually keeps the bevels pretty well. So as you can see, it adds more detail on the edges. It's not perfect, but essentially took no effort from my side. And if you look at the UV set as well, it does UVs. Again, they are not perfect, but they're perfectly fine for doing some kind of look dev. So if I open up Painter, just to show you really quick, they're pretty usable. And as we're approaching the end, I can show you a little project that I made recently. So Modeler, I made a wheel like this as a test, and then I got carried away and I made a whole truck attached to it. This one's pretty big, so it takes a while to load. Let's wait for that to show up. And I'm going to try and put on my headset at this point. I'm not sure if it's going to work perfectly because there's always a bunch of Oculus setup that Facebook asks from you. It's still loading. All right, so here's my truck. So this was essentially all made in Modeler. I did most of it in desktop mode, but I switched to VR for some things. So you see, same idea for the wheels as well. And let me quickly go into VR to show you what's possible here. So, okay, fingers crossed this is going to work. All right, it's asking me to enable the link. So grab my controllers. Wait for it to load. All right. Can you see this in VR, essentially, right? Get a whole lot closer. It's very awkward with my microphone that's close by. Okay, it's because the truck is fairly large scale. So you can use this to actually look around at the mesh. And I use this to judge the shapes and proportions a lot. And one of the things that I did for this as well, it's also a little bit easier if you don't sit down on your chair. And to be honest, there's one of the bugs with using in the beta with using large scale objects is that it loses track of the tracking. So these wires, these I did in VR. So you've seen me do how I did the wheel, that kind of shows the point. But if I make a quick new layer, and I'm going to go into this one here, I'm going to set it to steady, show you how I painted these wires. So you can turn on some kind of smoothing, see how it's slower to respond. So this is impossible to do in desktop, but if I paint really slowly, I can do some kind of crazy wires that are not possible to do in desktop, for example. Let's see a few other things that I've been doing here. Using the warp as well is also much more interesting. So for example, if I want to bend this antenna in a crazy way, I can actually jump into it and I'll grab the warp tool, make it a lot bigger, and see, I can kind of do, let's see, I want to make it a little bit harder. Warp, set the hardness up a bit, and jump into the antenna. See if I want to do some kind of bent antenna like that. That is super hard to do on desktop, to do this kind of bend that does a crazy transform. But because in VR you can do rotations and moves at the same time, it gives you a lot more possibilities. To be completely truthful, I can't do this for a super long time. Some of my coworkers can do this for hours. For me, like 1-2 hours a day max is sort of it. But it's pretty interesting to jump back and forth between it. So if I've done that now, I'm going to take it off again. I'll put down my controllers, press the button to turn it off, and you see that it jumps straight back into desktop, and I can continue modeling like that without any issues. So pretty easy to do. This same thing, I exported that as well using our exporting methods. So let me find that mesh so you can see it. Final low. Here we go. So you see with the UVs as well, I did make a few changes to them. But if you look at the triangles, it's pretty dense. Let's see, I'm not used to these controls of the Windows viewer. There we go. It's pretty dense, but it's also pretty usable what you can do with it. So I then took that into Painter. You see like here, for example, with the lower count, it optimized for hard edges there, and you can then bake from the high poly as well. And I texture that in Painter. Let me see if I can open it. Yeah, it should be this one. So what I did is because Modeler can't do that, I separated it into texture sets. I went into Max, I assigned 4 different texture sets, and then I had Painter repack the UVs. So I had a little textures here. I imagine this is some kind of crazy, I don't know, secret antenna research truck or whatever. And just using smart materials. I'm not claiming this is the best texture job. I think the whole thing, modeling, texturing up to this point took me 4 or 5 hours, which if I would have used standard sub-D modeling, standard UVing, and God forbids, not Painter to texture would probably take me 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 times as long to do, because I used to do that stuff. I got super tired of it, and I was just waiting for faster tools. And now that we have these, it's actually pretty interesting to do this kind of thing again. And then I eventually took that into Stager. So to show you, you can get that into Stager very easily if you say File, Send to Substance 3D Stager. Actually, let me do it now. I can even show you live. So it exports it, and it should start Stager on the fly then. There we go. To be a little bit patient for it to start up, it's loading the mesh in. All right, press F to focus. There's my little truck. I can place it on the ground. And then to make my render, I just dragged in a background and got that adjusted. And eventually, with a bit of an hour of tweaking in Stager, this is what I came up with. So the photos from Adobe stock, the truck is basically what I made in Modeler textured in Painter. And then I set up some extra lights, like a little bit of highlight here. I did a little bit of rim light there. And then I took it to Photoshop to do a bit of bloom, post-process, noise. I even used that AI neural fog filter for this. So yeah, whole project start to finish, including render, 6 hours, something like that, spread over 2-3 days. So it's pretty fun. You can do look dev stuff fairly quickly. Obviously, it's not in any way ready to go straight into a game or anything, but for exploration of ideas, shapes, it's pretty good. Yeah, so we're kind of nearing the end. I've shown all I wanted. I might have gone a little bit quickly over certain things, so I'm totally up for showing more or answering more questions in depth.
Yes.
Anything.
We have a question. Any plans to implement a way to bake down paint layers?
You mean collapsing the layer stack? We're looking into this, but it really is technically very complicated to do that kind of thing. So no promises. I think our engineers have thought about it, but I can't make any promises about that. Because you keep in mind, like if you do this, so just to answer, you lose the ability. You'd probably lose the ability to change the resolution. So you can't work at 2K and export at 4K anymore. There would be some kind of loss involved there. So it's not, we're really considering that this is something we want to allow. Anyway, other questions?
Yes, in Painter, currently you can't work on a 3D object that is mapped outside of a 0 to 1 UV space.
Yeah, you mean like overlaying UVs? Yeah.
Is there a way to go around that?
Not really. Like to give you an idea, for this truck, the wheels are all sharing the same UV space, and I moved 4 of them outside of the 0 to 1 UV space. The only way to do that is to work on the one that is inside the 0 to 1 UV space, because essentially it's repeating. If you're talking about UDIMs and UV tiles, that's a whole other story though. So excuse me, that requires a different setup. Not sure if I'm fully answering your question, but right now doesn't work ideal, but you could still paint on them if you work on the one that's within the range. Otherwise, no. And it's actually something I'll ask the team, because I don't really know what their stance on that is. Outside. Go ahead for the next question, by the way.
Will we ever see the ability to have a second UV set in Painter?
Yes, probably. I can't promise when, but this is also something that's like we keep track of the top requests, and we've solved a few of them that were really asked for a lot, like the UV tiles, the space mouse. Little one of these things that you use to navigate. I don't know if anybody here uses them, but you can now use that in Painter. I could demo it, but it's not hooked
we
up.
don't have any camera on you
Oh, you
there.
don't have the camera.
If you show anything, we don't see you.
All right, sorry, I forgot that I had to turn it on.
No worries.
Let's see, start video. Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
So one of the things we added, just to show that we do listen to the space mouse when you use this to navigate in 3D. I don't know if Creative Tools sells these, they might. We've added that, so we do listen to the requests, and this second UV is, I think, in the top 10, maybe top 5 as well. So it's for sure something that we're going to look at in the future.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, we have a few coming in here. Are any Python API updates planned? For example,
yeah, that's actually one I forgot because I'm not, again, it's sometimes very technical. I don't know what you might mean for Painter. So yes, for Painter, they're constantly working on this. One of the big ones we want to do, again, no promises, I'm not allowed to do that, is to allow layer stack management or manipulation through Python. That's going to come for sure in the future. But also for Sampler, they're going to allow a Python API to allow you to automate certain things. So that's quite new. That's something I can reveal. That's a bit of a sneak peek. I don't have anything to show related to that, but I can just say that for Sampler, we will have more, we will have a Python API coming in the future, actually near future. So that might answer your question.
Yes. In Designer, there's an add-on for generating curves and deforming shapes with Spline. Are you planning to add something like this?
We actually have prototypes for that internally. The thing with it, just to explain why it's slow to do that, is, well, one, our guys are always convinced they can do better than the external plugins, which probably true considering what they've made. But two, they also want it to be perfect, so they don't want to release it too early. I've seen it, I've played with it. If you're really curious, by the way, the cross-section node already contains a little bit of this curve prototyping in there. Like if you set it to the line mode, the cross section, where you can see a bit of that spline stuff in there. It's very limited though. So it is going to come maybe this year. I don't know. But for sure, we're thinking about this. I keep telling them as well that this is the holy grail of new nodes, and I would really like to have that. So we're considering it. But I guess the way to put it is when it's done is when it's going to come.
Great. So I'll just keep asking.
Yeah, go ahead. Keep asking. I have time.
We got a question here in the chat as well. Is there a way to flip textures in newest version of SP, I believe, Substance Painter?
Flip textures. You mean like I think that might be a hard one to do. You can do a transform on them. I've actually never tried this. Let's see. Let's do. I'm pretty sure it's going to be hard to do. You could do a transform in UV space. So you can add a, let me show that. Add a filter, add a transform. Yeah, it doesn't even let you flip it. Yeah, I'm going to say that's probably a no. I'd have to look into it to figure it out specifically. So you mean mirroring? I think that's a pretty hard one to do. You could create a filter for it though, but it's going to be very hard to use specifically. Like you'd have to do a setup with anchor points and so forth. So default content, no. If I mess around with Designer a bit, I could probably come up with something, but it's not going to be super easy to use, probably. So sorry.
Okay. Is there a roadmap for implementing node-based texturing like there is in Designer, but inside of Substance Painter?
Yeah, people keep asking for this. I'll say no. We're not really planning to do this at any point. If anything, you should probably learn Designer, and we should probably improve the live link or the integration between Designer and Painter, because we have a node-based program. And we have the philosophy of making individual programs that are dedicated to something that work well together. And we don't want to sort of, combine things too much, get in each other's overlap too much. I will say we have the Send to from Designer to Painter, which is good. It's better than what we had a year ago. but it could still be better. We could have some kind of live link where essentially it doesn't matter that you're a designer. You're just working with nodes and they instantly work in Painter. I can imagine that happening in the future. But again, no promises.
Okay. Let's see here. Is there any plans to improve workflow for removing texture tiling?
Removing texture tiling. I'm not sure which app you're talking about. I'd say it's pretty easy already. Maybe you're talking about
for
Painter.
Painter,
For Painter, yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I know some people use Painter for that, and we probably don't. Let me write that down. We probably don't put enough attention into that because we kind of intend people to do that inside Sampler, especially in the entertainment industry. I've seen this before. I've gone to game studios and people are like manually clone stamping tiling in Painter because they like it and that's what they do. But it's probably a lot easier to do in Sampler, I'd say. So that's where our efforts for improving are going. If you still feel Painter is the only app you can do this in, we'd love to hear specifically what you're interested in. Post on the Discord, go to the user voice as well to add more specific ideas, and we can take a look at that. I think that might answer your question.
He explains here that it is for working in large landscapes, for example.
Okay, that's okay. I need a bit more information to see specific. It sounds like a complicated workflow. We can get in touch. You could get on the Discord or the forum to ask for a little bit more information. We could try to help you.
Just send your question and some more information about what you're working with, and we'll try to connect you with Laurens for some more information.
Sure.
Could we have a simple 3D painting in Designer? You can easily paint in 2D there, but that's super useful for...
I have no idea if there are any plans for that. I'll say for now, nothing like that is planned. It's kind of the opposite way, right? People want nodes in Painter and they want painting in Designer. Well, they should probably just work together a little bit better. So for now, no plans like that.
Okay. We also have a question about the current status of 60K, 32K textures.
16K. Yeah, I can't make any claims on that. We're definitely always looking at that, but like, the hardware is the limitation. Before, a few years ago, you couldn't do 8K. Now you can, but it might take a few more NVIDIA generations before that's easily possible. Because again, if we enable it and it crashes each computer because it runs out of VRAM, then nobody's going to be happy with that either. So no promises, but obviously not saying it's never going to happen.
Great. So currently that's all the questions we have.
All right.
Feel free to drop some questions if you have anything for Laurens. Otherwise, we'll be trying to round off.
All right.
If you don't have anything to bring up.
Cool. I'll stop sharing my screen as well. Stop share. Okay. All right. Anyway, some interesting questions from people. I can tell most of the participants are more advanced entertainment customers because otherwise I don't get these kinds of questions. Again, if you want to get a bit more in touch, we actually do read ideas from people. So we have a user voice where you can post ideas. So I hear a lot of people were asking, what about this feature? We want that. Look at the user voice, add comments to the existing ones. A lot of the ones that keep coming back are already there. So you can add your voice to it. And we do feedback on those from time to time. And there's also this an Adobe support forum where you can go for specific technical questions. Like, I'm trying to do this, because believe it or not, often when people are asking for a feature, it sometimes means as well that they don't know about another feature that could help with that. So asking for support can definitely be useful.
Yep.
Cool. So if we have no more questions, then
no, it looks like it's pretty much answered all of them. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
And thank you, everyone, for joining today. So we'll be rounding off. Thank you, Laurens, for participating, showing us your presentation. If you have any further questions, or if there's anything you can come up with after the webinar, please feel free to contact us, and we'll try to keep you in touch with Laurens for some answers.
All right. Cool. Perfect. Everybody,
thank you very much.
Bye. And thanks.
Bye.